So here's a video I wasn't expecting to make, because it's about Doctor Who. I haven't uploaded anything for a while. I've had some personal issues, some health problems, but I haven't stopped researching and writing stuff. But I really wasn't expecting to come back with this, because I'm pretty ambivalent about Doctor Who. I loved Sylvester McCoy's run when I was a kid. I liked the Paul McGann TV movie. And I watched the show from Christopher Eccleston till about the time that Rory and Amy left during Matt Smith's run. I do want to respond to Jodie Whittaker's casting as the 13th Doctor Who, though, because I've found a lot of the reactions to it interesting. I'll have to say that up front I was pleasantly surprised by how positive the majority of the reactions to her naming were. But apparently the imbeciles have stirred, and based upon what a lot of these people were saying, I became curious about the show's history. So I've done a little research, and I have some thoughts, and I hope you don't mind me sharing them with you. First off, this isn't really a disclaimer, but it's something I probably should point out. When I've been in discussions on politics and stuff online, it's been noted on many occasions that I'm an ultra-libtard SJW. I subscribe to progressive ideas on pretty much any topic. I'm very liberal, especially of things like LGBT rights and also, obviously, the role of women in society. But my support for Whittaker's casting isn't intrinsically fueled by this. I didn't really know anything about Jodie Whittaker until she was named. I know a lot of people who watch Broadchurch, for example, and they've all told me that she's an incredibly talented and charismatic performer. And obviously the creator of Broadchurch, Chris Chibnall, has come on board to Doctor Who as the new executive producer. And this was also received enthusiastically. But even with this in mind, it's important to acknowledge the fact that everyone involved needs to land this. Nothing can be taken for granted. Peter Capaldi's run seems to have provoked a great deal of criticism. I can't really offer an opinion on this, because I've seen like one episode. I liked it. I think the companion was someone called Bill, and I thought that they were an interesting team, and I thought it was pretty good, but whatever. Ultimately, beyond the gender of the Doctor, who the companions are, anything else, ultimately what matters more than anything else is whether or not fans of Doctor Who are getting the great stories which are worthy of their love and dedication and loyalty. I've seen the word gimmick come up more than once, and yeah, this is casting a woman as the Doctor is a gimmick. But this part of show business and television production. Gimmicks are part of the deal. Whenever the interior of the TARDIS is redesigned, it's a gimmick. Whenever the sonic screwdriver is redesigned, it's a gimmick. The very concept of regeneration is one of the show's gimmicks. And what matters in this context is how you develop these ideas which you've introduced. This decision won't have been taken lightly. The notion of a female Doctor has been debated for years within the fan community, but also within the production offices of the BBC. But that's boring. So here's a quote from a grammatically deranged Change.org petition I found calling for a male 13th Doctor. It is clear the BBC does not respect the storyline, the history or tradition of the show. Instead, they are mindlessly following the uneducated SJW community for attention and publicity. Doctor Who has shoved in numerous political points down our throats, uneducated comments on capitalism, etc., which do not belong in a sci-fi TV show. This is curious for several reasons. First of all, SJW community. It's always important to get that one in. Doctor Who has shoved in numerous political points down our throats, uneducated comments on capitalism. I can't really speak to that. I think there was an episode from Dave Tennant's run called Rise of the Cybermen when the Cybermen were reintroduced. I seem to remember that Roger Lloyd Pack's character was the head of something called Cybus Industries, and basically they were a mega corporation, and they were the ones who had created the Cybermen. So I guess that's commentary on capitalism. I need help with this. I mean, has Peter Capaldi travelled back to the 1950s and hung out with Ayn Rand or something? I'm also confused by this idea that political points don't belong on sci-fi shows, because if anything, sci-fi and fantasy are two of the genres most appropriate for discussing social and political issues. If you take something, for example, like Babylon 5, which is a show I love, insanely political show, like huge amount to say. And even before that, there's a more obvious example you can make, which is the casting of the original Star Trek, which you could argue is like a utopian ideal, where international differences and tensions have been largely resolved. And there's this utopian idea of, it's perfectly natural for a black woman to serve as an officer on the bridge, and you've got a Russian guy and a Chinese guy in there. These things are just part and parcel of life in a better time. It is clear the BBC does not respect the storyline, the history or tradition of the show. I found this part particularly interesting because, off the top of my head, I was aware of something which challenges this assertion. The Curse of the Fatal Death was a special produced for Comic Relief in 1999. I remember watching it when it aired. I loved it. It had Daleks in it. Jonathan Pryce was the Master. And it had a rotating cast of regenerating doctors. I think it was Rowan Atkinson, Hugh Grant was in there, and Jim Broadbent. And Joanna Lumley. But that was a one-off special, so it's not really canon, right? Well, yes and no. In April of this year, Doctor Who magazine carried an interview with the writer of The Curse of the Fatal Death, a guy called Stephen Moffat. Now, I'm getting this from a preview of that issue on TARDIS.wikia, so hopefully I haven't quoted this out of context, but please correct me if I've completely dicked this up. It says, Stephen Moffat discussed how the intent of the special was to make a regular episode of Doctor Who, which happened to also be funny rather than just a blatant spoof, meaning that extreme steps were taken to have it fit within the then existing canon. An ad-lib by Jonathan Pryce calling Emma, Julia Sawala's companion, Mrs. Who, was thus vetoed. Now, what comes next kind of undermines this point, but not really. Moffat went on to add that while it has since been disregarded, at the time it could have been seen as a legitimate continuation of the show. I think overall this point stands. And I also think it's worth noting that Jodie Whittaker isn't technically the second woman to play the Doctor. She's actually the third. In 2003, Arabella Weir portrayed the Doctor in Exile, an audio drama in the Doctor Who Unbound series. Now, this isn't really canon because Unbound was a sort of what-if Elseworlds kind of deal. But she was playing the Doctor, and it seems like quite a dramatic and compelling one. The plot apparently involves her previous incarnation having committed suicide, and the Doctor's fled to Earth, where she's sort of scratching a living together by working in a supermarket and basically living the alcoholic dream in pubs every night. As a side note, David Tennant was also in Exile, albeit as a different Time Lord. Regardless, there's actually another recent justification for Time Lords changing sex, beyond the fact that they're, aliens in a fictional TV show. This one comes from the most recent series. Now, again, I haven't really watched it, so I'm sorry if I've completely shit the bed on this one, but there's a character in it called Missy, played by an actress called Michelle Gomez. She's apparently a future incarnation of the Master. Missy is short for Mistress. But Ryan, you man-hating cuck, these are all examples of new Who. What about the historic series which was so beloved before Russell T Davies got his hands on the thing? This is Sidney Newman. He co-created Doctor Who and developed the concept with Verity Lambert, a young producer who was also a woman. In 1986, Newman wrote to then BBC chairman Michael Grade about the possibility of returning to the series as executive producer. And he had a number of suggestions about how the show could be reinvigorated, given the faltering appeal of Colin Baker. Apparently he stated that Patrick Troughton should return, which is kind of strange, but not the worst idea ever. He had another suggestion as well. At a later stage, Doctor Who would be metamorphosed into a woman. He continued, "This requires some considerable thought. Mainly because I want to avoid a flashy Hollywood Wonder Woman, because this kind of heroine has no flaws, and a character with no flaws is a bore." Now, Newman smacked down Colin Baker's era hard. He stated that it was largely socially valueless escapist schlock. Now, I don't know if it's unreasonable to say that Patrick Troughton's return would have been a gimmick which would have arrested the show's ratings problems, but also helped give it a launch pad to push the narrative and cultural envelope. Apparently, in a Doctor Who magazine interview with Newman, he's quoted as saying, "Doctor Who was really the culmination of almost all of my interests in life. I wanted to reflect contemporary society. I was curious about the outer space stuff, and also, of course, being a children's programme, it had to have high educational content." Goddamn social justice warrior. Interestingly, 1986 also saw a BBC show called Open Air hold a discussion about the state of Doctor Who. It featured a representative from the Doctor Who Appreciation Society who was apparently quite critical of the show's quality at that time. His name was Chris Chibnall. Incidentally, Chibnall was also a head writer on Torchwood, though I don't know if deputising that into my arguments really helps, because Torchwood was shit for the most part. You see my point, right? What I'm basically trying to say is that many of the things people seem critical of are actually present in the show's DNA. Now, if I don't really care about Doctor Who, what's prompted me to make such a long video about it? I think my concern is more about the quality and tone of debate. The information I found wasn't hard to come by, but most people aren't interested in rounding out their arguments. I could have probably done a better job of sourcing and citing everything I've used here, but at least I tried to take that extra step. And if I've got anything wrong here, if my information's off, or even if you just disagree with my assessments, then I welcome corrections and I welcome constructive debate in the comments. It's one of the reasons I started making videos in the first place. The relationship between society and art is symbiotic. They nourish and inform, and yes, sometimes afflict one another. Jodie Whittaker's casting opens up new narrative perspectives and opportunities. And if you're truly a fan of something as innovative and inventive as Doctor Who, I don't understand why you wouldn't find this opportunity anything other than enormously exciting. Given his long-standing love of the show, and the simple fact that his reputation is on the line, there is no way that Chris Chibnall is going to coast this one. And if it doesn't pan out, at least the matter would have been settled. But given the pedigree of everyone involved and the history of the show itself, I think there's considerable cause for optimism. So I congratulate Jodie Whittaker, I congratulate the new staff behind the scenes, and most of all, I congratulate the fans of Doctor Who. Peace, love, etc.